I'm about to break Grok 4.1 with 5 tests that shouldn't be possible. We're starting with a story written completely backwards and ending with something that made my brain hurt. Let's see where it taps out. All right, test 1. I want a complete mystery story written in reverse. Last paragraph first, opening scene last. But it still has to build suspense while going backwards. And when you flip it around and read it normally, it needs to work as an actual whodunit. This breaks most AI models because they have to think forward and backwards at the same time. Okay, Grok says, here's the story, written entirely in reverse order. Final revelation first, opening scene last, just as we asked. Read it exactly as presented, then try reading the paragraphs in reversed order, bottom to top, and you'll get the forward whodunit that also works perfectly. Well, we're starting here at the end, and we see, okay, look at this. We're opening with the detective closing the case file, finally understanding what happened. Then each paragraph before this peels back another layer. The timeline's reversing, but the mystery's building. We're seeing consequences before causes. If you want to hear the whole story, I included a reading of it at the end of this video. But for now, I just want to give it a pass-fail verdict. And my verdict is a structural pass, but a narrative fail. It's kind of like a parlor trick, not a plot. Grok nailed the logistics of the prompt, but failed the soul of the genre. Here's my quick analysis. The prompt asks for it to work as a whodunit. When read forward, 1 through 12, it fails. In paragraph 3, reading forward, we explicitly watch Camille sabotage the rope. By the time the detective shows up in paragraph 7, the audience is 5 steps ahead of him. In other words, Grok doesn't seem to understand the difference between a whodunit, like an Agatha Christie, and a How Ketchum, Columbo. Reading forward, this isn't a mystery, it's a thriller from the killer's POV, which, is fair enough, maybe a great story, but it's not exactly what we asked. The suspense is instantly deflated because the reader holds the smoking gun before the body is even found. Now let's talk about the prose. It's competent, but a bit cliche. The writing is purple and relies on standard tropes, biblical storm, limbs tangled like a broken marionette. I like that phrase a lot, but it is arguably overused. It reads like a decent creative writing student, but maybe not a seasoned pro. The prose is functional, but tries too hard. It lacks the grit and specific grounded details that make a Jack Carr or a Stephen King novel feel so real. Now let's get weird. Test 2, the genre chaos story that changes every 100 words. Test 2 is ridiculous. I want one continuous story that changes genre every 100 words. Starts as horror, becomes romance at word 100, sci-fi at 200, noir at 300, 15 total genres, same characters, same plot, but the writing style completely shifts. And I added some stuff to the beginning of this prompt to hopefully get better result. This really shouldn't work though. Genres have rules. And here we go. Okay, here's my verdict on test 2. A creative fever dream, but a technical failure. Grok 4.1 produced a piece of writing that is atmospherically brilliant, but mathematically incompetent. It failed the specific constraints of my prompts, 15 genres. The voice and style of Grok is one of my favorite things, but you really have to nail down the details. I asked for a marathon, it ran a sprint. AI models really struggled desperately with long-term math and prompts. It lost count around genre 6, I think. If you were relying on this for a strict structure, you'd be left with a manuscript that's 40% shorter than your contract requires. Not good. And here's probably my biggest problem. I asked for a modern literary best-selling author, and Grok interpreted that as use a metaphor in every single sentence. This reads like a poet having a panic attack. Some lines are gold, rats don't breathe in Latin is a 10 out of 10 opening hook. I love it. But the density is exhausting. A human author knows how to vary sentence structure to let the reader breathe. Grok is cranking the literary dial to 11 on every single line, which actually makes it feel less human and more like a performance. There's also the narrative glitch, or the transition problem. In my prompt, I asked for one continuous story. A human author would use narrative bridges. For example, a holodeck simulating glitching, a dream sequence, a madness descent. Grok used dream logic. Things just dissolve or explode into the next scene without cause. This isn't a plot, it's a montage. Grok relied on what I would call lazy bridges. A human writer would explain why the world is shifting. Is he time traveling? Is he insane? Grok just shouts, and now we are in Japan, and expects the reader to keep up. It lacks the narrative glue that holds a novel together. There's a surprise win here, which I think might be the ending. Despite the structural mess that this is, the ending is legitimately strong. The twist? That the protagonist is now the infected marked one, the scar was never mine, check your collarbone, is a classic and, in my opinion, well executed horror trope. I have to give credit where credit's due. The ending landed. It proves that Grok understands story beats, even if it can't count genres. I took this story and ran it through Lead Magnet Maker Pro. What this does is take any piece of content and turn it into lead magnets for your email list. The title, the scar that wasn't hers, the author name. You can copy paste a portion of your work, upload a book cover, your author photo. You can even write a testimonial. You can choose between 5 different templates. For this one, we'll do split screen, add your call to action, add your link. You can also add some copywriting with benefits. Optionally, you can include a countdown timer and a video with a link to a YouTube video. Then there's also color themes. I prefer the luxury dark. Hit generate and we have generated the book. It happens instantaneously. You can actually generate an unlimited number of these flip books for whatever you want. Here we go. The scar that wasn't hers. Here's the sample chapter. You can flip right here. Look how cool that is. I think it makes for a great experience for the user. But if you scroll down, you can see what else we've added. We have our timer. We have the book cover, which I think looks really good. We have my bio image. We have the quote and testimonial, the benefits. We even have the video, and then you can get your next story in your inbox. You can have it linked to wherever you want it to go. That's just one of many templates that you can build with this tool. Let's go to test 3. 3 stories nested inside each other. A thriller writer with writer's block, writing about a detective who can't solve a murder, who has a daughter writing a fantasy where the hero can't beat the dragon. Each layer needs its own arc, but when the innermost story resolves, it triggers the middle story's solution, which unlocks the outer story's ending. Based on our first 2 tests, I have serious doubts about how this is going to go, but let's find out. I think this is a fascinating test because it pushes the AI to handle causality across dimensions, a task that requires high-level abstract reasoning, not just sentence prediction. Again, I think Grok nails the structure, but procedurally, maybe there's a little bit of cheating going on. Grok pulled off the Russian doll structure better than 90% of models, I'd say, keeping the 3 voices distinct. However, it failed the most critical part of a mystery, the deductive leap. If you look closely at the transition between the fantasy story and the detective story, you'll see that the knight realizes the dragon isn't bad. He returns its heart. Mara reads, give it back its heart, and immediately sprints to the evidence locker to find a USB drive in a miscellaneous envelope. Now here's the problem. There is zero logical connection between those 2 things. Why does reading about a dragon's heart make a detective think, I bet there's a hidden USB drive I missed? This, I think, is where the AI hallucinated a bridge. It confused thematic resonance with procedural logic. A human author would have planted a specific linguistic clue. Grok skipped the clue and just teleported the detective to the answer. There's a style win here. Grok successfully maintained 3 distinct voices. Usually, AI bleeds styles together. If you ask for a pirate and a banker, by paragraph 3, you'll have a pirate talking about compound interest. Grok kept the firewall up. The fantasy section felt like a fantasy. The noir section felt like a noir. That is a massive win for context retention. A best-selling author like Anthony Horowitz, who loves nested stories, would have made the layers interact more aggressively. Maybe the daughter's story predicts a murder that hasn't happened yet. Grok gave us a tidy, closed loop. It satisfies the prompt, but it doesn't leave you staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m. Test 4 gets dark. One scene, a jewelry heist, told by 5 unreliable narrators. One's deliberately lying, one's traumatized and misremembering, one's delusional, one's in denial, and one's literally a hallucination. Okay, a quick scroll through what we have. It's pretty short. Let's see how it did. My verdict, a masterclass in voice, again, but a C grade in subtlety. Grok aced the syntax test. You don't need the labels to know who is speaking. The delusional king uses high archaic diction, while the traumatized witness uses staccato fragments. Most AIs bleed these together. Grok kept the firewalls up. The invisible bridge of narrator 5, the hallucination, is the structural MVP. By having the hallucination confirm that narrator 3 was singing with the diamonds, Grok cleverly confirmed that the king was actually there and acting crazy, grounding the delusion physical reality. That is high-level narrative weaving. However, the liar was lazy. Narrator 1, I think, is the weakest link. It was Ricky, is kindergarten lying. A sophisticated thriller writer knows a liar admits to a small crime or a small truth, like being the lookout, to avoid the big crime. Grok went for the cheap, wasn't me trope. Now, once again, I think Grok passed the puzzle test. If you overlay the narratives, you get a coherent picture. It constructed a solvable crime seen through the fog of unreliable narration. So once again, I think we have a structural win, but a narrative maybe win? Final test. 6 300-word stories about 6 strangers whose lives connect. The catch? You can read them in any order. That's 720 possible sequences, and every single one of them has to make narrative sense. I have no idea what's about to happen. All right, we have a few already. And again, if you want to get the complete story, I'll include a narration at the end of this video. For now, I'm just going to give you my initial thoughts. Let me just read this opening summary. Grok says, here are the 6 stories. Each is exactly 300 words, self-contained and numbered only by the stranger's name. Read them in any order you like, front to back to front, or scrambled like tarot cards. That's kind of cool. Every permutation tells a coherent, different, but complete story about how 6 lives silently collided on the same winter afternoon in the city of Valent. Not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but sounds very interesting. Probably not going to be surprised by this verdict at this point. I think it's a structural triumph, but a logic, can we call it just a hallucination? Grok solved the 720 permutation problem by using a synchronous timeline rather than a sequential one. By anchoring every story to the mitten drop, it ensures that no matter which card you pull first, the central event remains fixed. This is sophisticated narrative engineering. It didn't try to link A to B to C, it linked A, B, C, D, E, and F to event X. Genius. But let's talk about the physics fail, or the seamstress paradox. Here's where I think the error lies. In Sophia's story, she recognizes a diamond ring because she sewed a secret compartment into the band. And I think this is maybe where AI exposes itself. You don't sew metal. You don't use a needle and thread on a diamond ring setting. Grok associated crafting with sewing and hallucinated a physical impossibility to force a connection. A human editor catches that instantly, and AI apparently thinks it's poetic. There's a critique here about the small world syndrome. The web of coincidences is too tight. Elena is Sophia's daughter. Jonah sees his grandmother's pattern. Clara buys a handkerchief from the missing grandmother. It went full soap opera. 6 strangers turned out to be one estranged family reunion. While it satisfies the prompt's need for connection, it feels completely artificial, which is ironic. It sacrificed realism for closure. But I do want to be fair and say that there is a win here, I think, for emotional resonance. Despite the logic, the emotional core just works. The paper boat detail and the replacement diamond in Leo's story are genuine human feeling beats. So Grok passed the hardest test of all, the non-linear narrative. It created a holographic story where you can see the whole picture from any angle. However, it still failed basic reality testing. The blueprint looks amazing, but the plumbing doesn't quite always work. I think maybe we just broke Grok 4.1. It barely survived these 5 impossible tests. If you want that Lead Magnet Maker Pro tool to turn your content into email list builders, see the link below. Don't go anywhere yet. Stay around for the full narration of a couple of these tests, and then I'll see you in the next video.
Afternoon, in the city of Valente, Mara, 34, subway conductor, kept a paper tally of every passenger who smiled at her through the cab window. On December 17th, the tally reached 10,000. She tore the sheet from her note, folded it into a paper boat, and set it on the dashboard. At Crescent Street Station, a boy in a red coat dropped a mitten. Mara braked hard, opened the doors, herself, and ran it back to him. The mother's grateful eyes became smile 10,001. Mara never noticed the man on the platform filming her on his phone, nor the old woman who later watched that video on a bus and cried because the conductor looked exactly like her daughter, who vanished 20 years ago. Mara simply returned to her cab, pressed the doors close button, and whispered to the empty train, "One more circuit and I'm done for the day." The paper boat caught a draft from the vents and sailed the length of the windshield before settling again, pointing forward. Leo, 62, retired jeweler, sat on the downtown 9 bus, clutching a small velvet box. Inside lay a replacement diamond for a ring he'd made in 1987, the one his wife Elena lost the week before she died. He'd spent 2 decades searching pawn shops for that exact stone. Today, he finally found it, mislabeled, underpriced. He was taking it to the cemetery to bury with her. At a red light, he saw a subway train screech to a halt across the intersection. A conductor leapt out to return a child's mitten. Something about the gesture cracked him open. He pressed the box to his chest, and for the first time since Elena's funeral, cried in public. An old woman across the aisle handed him a tissue embroidered with tiny forget-me-nots. He laughed through tears. Elena's favorite flower. Sophia, 79, former seamstress, carried a plastic bag of embroidered handkerchiefs she sold for bus fare. Arthritis had slowed her hands, but muscle memory never died. On the 9 bus, she watched an old man open a velvet box, saw the ring, saw him weep. She recognized the setting immediately, her own stitches from 1987, when a young jeweler had asked her to sew a secret compartment into the band for a proposal. She pulled a fresh handkerchief from her bag, one she'd embroidered that morning with forget-me-nots, and offered it. The man's eyes widened. "Elena," he whispered, because the stitches were identical to his wife's handwriting. Sophia only smiled, said nothing, and got off at the next stop to catch the uptown train home. Jonah, 26, broke filmmaker, stood on the platform at Crescent Street, filming B-roll for a short about kindness. His battery was dying, his grant money gone, but he kept shooting. A subway braked hard. A conductor sprinted out with a red mitten. Jonah's camera caught every frame. Later, uploading the clip from a cafe, he noticed in the background an old woman on the opposite platform, watching the scene, clutching a plastic bag and crying. Something about her face haunted him. He zoomed, froze, enhanced. The handkerchief peeking from her pocket bore the same forget-me-not pattern as the one his grandmother used to wave when she tucked him in as a child. He saved the still, heart hammering, unsure why. Clara, 8, wore a red coat and one mitten. When the subway doors opened and the conductor ran to her with a lost one, she offered the only thank you she could think of, a candy cane from her pocket, slightly fluffy with lint. The conductor, Mara, laughed and accepted it. Clara watched the train pull away, then turned to her mother and announced she wanted to drive trains when she grew up. Her mother, distracted by phone, nodded absently. On the walk home, Clara saw a bus stop where an old woman sold handkerchiefs. One had tiny blue flowers. "Like Nana's," Clara said. Her mother bought it without looking up. Clara pressed the cloth to her face. It smelled faintly of lavender and old thread, exactly like the grandmother who disappeared before Clara was born. Elena, 41, archivist for missing persons cases, rode the uptown train home exhausted. 20 years ago, her mother Sophia vanished without a trace. Elena still checked every lead. At Crescent Street, the train lurched. Through the window, she saw a conductor return a mitten to a little girl in red. Something about the conductor's profile stopped her breath. Same cheekbones, same tilt of head. Elena pulled out her phone, opened the old photo of Sophia at 34. Identical. She filmed the conductor reboarding, hands shaking. Later that night, she would enhance the footage, spot the old woman on the platform, clutching embroidered handkerchiefs, zoom further, see the forget-me-not pattern, and finally understand the shape her mother's life had taken after walking away. But for now, the train simply moved on, carrying Elena forward into a future where nothing would ever be lost again.
Let's go all the way back to that very first story. Here it is.
12. Inspector Leclerc closed the leather folio with a soft snap. "So it was the sister all along," he said, almost gently. Camille Valmont stared at the floor, wrists cuffed, rain still dripping from her coat. On the blotter lay the missing page of Julian's will, the one that left everything to her provided he died by accident. The forged climbing rope certificate, the doctored weather report, the single strand of her dark hair caught in his carabiner, all of it laid out like a losing hand of cards. She had no more denials left, only a small, exhausted smile. "He should have fallen," she whispered. "He always said the mountain would forgive him one day. It didn't." 11. Leclerc knelt beside the body on the morgue slab. Julian Valmont's face was oddly serene beneath the livid bruising at the temples. The pathologist pointed to the faint, semicircular marks, almost lost in the hairline. "Not the fall," he said. "Someone struck him twice with a rounded object. Your classic mountaineer's ice hammer, before pushing him off the ledge. The avalanche covered the rest." Leclerc's eyes narrowed. An ice hammer. Camille had posted a photograph of hers only last week. Ebony handle, engraved initials CV, 10. In the darkened study of the Valmont chalet, Leclerc discovered the safe behind the saison was already open. Inside, Julian's climbing journal. Its last entry dated the day he died. A single line, scrawled in frantic ink. "If anything happens to me on the Aiguille, do not trust C. She wants what was never hers." 9. The storm that night was biblical. Leclerc and the gendarmes had to wait until dawn to reach the refuge at 3,800 meters. When they finally pried open the door, they found Julian's rucksack exactly where the rescue team had left it. But the satellite phone that should have been clipped to the outside pocket was missing. Someone had come back after the official recovery. Someone who knew the combination to the refuge's emergency cache. Madame Dubois, the housekeeper, swore she had seen nothing, yet her hands trembled as she poured coffee. Mademoiselle Camille arrived the evening before the climb, she insisted. She and Monsieur Julien argued terribly in the library. Something about money, always money. When pressed, she admitted Camille had asked for the spare key to the equipment room to oil her crampons, she'd said. 7. Back in Chamonix, Leclerc interviewed the guide who had turned back with Julian's client that fateful morning. The weather closed in fast, the man said, shrugging. Julien insisted on continuing alone to the summit, said he had to settle something. He was carrying that old ice hammer of his father's, the one with the cracked handle he refused to replace. 6. 3 days earlier, at the funeral, Camille had stood dry-eyed beside the casket, gloved hand resting on the polished wood, as if it already belonged to her. She wore black so elegantly that half the village whispered she looked more like a bride than a mourner. When Leclerc offered condolences, she met his gaze without blinking. My brother was reckless, she said. The mountain always collects its debts. 5. The avalanche report was unequivocal. A single skier had triggered the slide high on the north face of the Aiguille du Midi. Rescue teams found Julien Valmont's body 200 meters below the breach, limbs tangled like a broken marionette. The official verdict came swiftly. Tragic accident. The family closed ranks. The investigation, everyone assumed, was over before it began. 4. Julien had phoned his lawyer the night before the climb, voice tight with anger. If I don't come back, make sure Camille gets nothing. Burn the new will if you have to. The lawyer, unsettled, had booked the first train to Chamonix, but by the time he arrived, Julien was already missing, presumed dead beneath half a kilometer of snow. 3. In the equipment room of the chalet, Camille carefully swapped the certified static rope for an identical-looking one, whose core had been cleverly frayed with a scalpel. She worked quickly, humming, then hung it back on Julien's peg. Tomorrow he would clip it to the old piton above the Bergschrund, and when he leaned back to rest, she wiped her fingerprints from the coils and smiled at her reflection in the polished ice axe. 2. Julien stood on the terrace at dusk, watching the last light bleed from the peaks. Behind him, Camille poured 2 glasses of chartreuse. To your summit tomorrow, brother, she said, raising hers. He didn't see the way her eyes lingered on the rope, coiled neatly by the door, or the way her fingers tightened around the stem of the glass. 1. The Valmont chalet clung to the edge of Chamonix like a jealous lover, all sharp angles and vast windows facing the blinding white teeth of the Mont Blanc Massif. Snow hissed against the glass. Inside, the fire crackled, and Julien Valmont laughed as he showed his sister the revised will one last time. Everything to mountain conservation, nothing to her. You'll have to find another way to pay your debts, Camille. She smiled thinly, already reaching for the bottle. Outside, the storm began to gather.